Righty, folks. Hey, we have one little last unit to take care of right here. I say, as it is in fact one of the more in-depth ones and one of the most modern ones right here. It's the most modern one. So, let's go ahead and just waste no time and get on into it here. So, there are four chapters in this unit here. Today's we are taking a look here at the post-JFK world right here of Lyndon B. Johnson and Richard Milhouse Nixon right there. There's a lot of different stuff right here, kind of wrapping up Unit 8. A fair amount of terms, but as you're going to see, they kind of feed off of each other. Let's go ahead and get into it here, folks. All right. So, more context. Lyndon B. Johnson, you may recall, he was JFK's vice president here. He is a seasoned politician from Texas. He only becomes president at first because of the fact that JFK was killed by, possibly George H.W. Bush. More on that later. We see that once LBJ is the man in charge, well, he is going to have a unique blend here of wanting to honor JFK's legacy, but also having his own spin on things right here. He was severely influenced by this book called The Other America as a kid, and he himself grew up poor. It concluded that the New Deal has not actually reached about 25% of the country, and therefore all those post war gains they actually never really impacted anyone within that 25%. So his domestic policy, the Great Society, you can think of it as a war on poverty. He is hoping to eliminate economic inequality. And while we're at it here, as a way, because JFK wanted to push for civil rights and never got the chance before he was killed, let's actually include something about civil rights in there. So you may recall LBJ was a very persuasive person when he wanted to be. He was like physically imposing in more ways than one. He was a very aggressive negotiator. He would, loom over people or drag them into the stall as he is trying to go poo. Like he was very good at getting people off their guard. And as a result, even though he's a gross human being, he's actually one of the most effective and progressive Democrat presidents we've ever actually seen. The Great Society did a bunch of stuff designed to just get rid of some of these income inequality. We saw created the Department of Housing and Urban Development right here, better housing systems, food stamps. It created the idea of making sure that people are being able to get desegregation busing. And among the ones that we showed you, there was a few tangible gains under LBJ as a result of the civil rights movement. We will see more about those next chapter, but it's under LBJ's watch that there's the official end to segregation in public spaces, right there. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, as well as the Voting Rights Act, getting rid of those previous like literacy tests and poll taxes, and that will be backed up by a 24th Amendment later. Um, we also see that it's under LBJ that we see the Immigration Act that's going to completely get rid of those immigration quotas. And so that's going to be a huge gain for foreign workers coming in. And as we'll see, because of the events of the war and the CIA, a lot of the people that want to come to this country are from Latin America. More on that later down the road in this unit here. So, what do we actually end up seeing here? Meanwhile, the Supreme Court, the Warren Court of LBJ, is going to have a lot of progressive gains in terms of increasing opportunities for a lot of people here. We see that there's a lot of stuff about ensuring the rights for an individual under the police are protected, like Gideon v. Wainwright. You have a public attorney. The Miranda rights. You are now informed of what you're allowed to do or not do and how it can hurt you. We see that school prayer is banned. We see that contraceptives are considered essential here. There's a lot of little things that are making people's lives better in many tangible ways, and it works. Unemployment is almost, sorry, I should say poverty is almost cut in half during LBJ's time in office. It is a huge upheaval, and this war is working, this war on poverty. The downside, this is expensive. The government, the federal government, has expanded its reach significantly. And therefore, in order to pay for all this, we have to raise taxes. And so, what we're going to end up seeing here is that there will be pushbacks very early on, including just a year into LBJ's term when he has to run for re election in 1964 Fun fact, that was the year that my dad was born. We see that there is debates about, do we actually want this level of government intervention, which is bigger than what the New Deal wanted. There are whispers, which will later turn into a full organized movement called the New Right. But at this point, it is basically a man named Barry Goldwater. We saw AUH2O. He's going to argue that the government should be smaller to not do as much, but also there's going to be the beginnings of this Christianity tilt right here. That these are assaults on our Christian values, like like contraceptives and the like. And he is going to be aggressive and uncompromising about his goals in protecting that. So we'll see how those two kind of mesh further down in about 20 years here with the rise of Ronald Reagan. So the new right, it appears, more on that further down the road. Now, one of the biggest things here is that LBJ is mostly remembered for his foreign policy. Despite having all these tangible gains, he's remembered for a blunder, which is the Vietnam War. So you can argue that it starts in 64, but it's not really going to end, at least, sorry, it really is going to really starts in the 50s here when the Vietnam is going to be overthrown by a communist revolution here. But for our perspective, it starts in 64 here. LBJ was of the opinion in something called guns and butter. Don't worry about the cost of all this stuff because the US is such a prosperous country that makes enough money in taxes and has enough rich people that we can do both of these things. We can do great society stuff and make life better at home, and we can keep the world safe from communism. We can do military intervention and great society improvements. So, why does that matter? We saw ever since World War II, there has been this growing fear of the rise of communism and the threat of containing it. We need to make sure it stops spreading here. And there's a growing fear ever since the days of really JFK that if a country like Vietnam were to fall to communism here, that would be a domino for all these other countries in Southeast Asia to also fall to communism. And therefore, it's only getting bigger. It's a threat. It's only a matter of time until it arrives at our door. So we see that LBJ is concerned about Vietnam possibly becoming fully communist and entrenching that. He says that he will not let Vietnam go the way of China. So he sends a warship over to an area called the Gulf of Tonkin. Now, exactly what happened is up for debate, but the U.S. report insists that a Vietnamese ship fired upon our warships here and caused injuries. So, following this Gulf of Tonkin incident here, uh, the we're going to see something passed called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which is going to give LBJ specifically, as the president, carte blanche, a blank check. Use whatever money or resources you need to go solve this Vietnam issue. And he does. We see that this is effectively the start of a war, but one that was not actually declared by Congress. That's an important distinction here because World War I and II and any other war before this had to be voted on by Congress after the president asked for a declaration of war. This one, LBJ effectively starts it. And that is going to be something that will rub people the wrong way further down the road. So, as this war goes on, it is immediately clear, for many reasons, that this is not the same thing as World War I or II. One, we are the clear aggressor here. Even though we are ostensibly liberating Vietnam, we are seeing that we are the invaders. Two, there is a lot of norms that go away. Like, there is a fear of the fact that this is not a conventional war. We are not seeing uniformed soldiers on both sides in battle formations. It is more of a guerrilla war. We are seeing combatants disguised as civilians. We are seeing ingenious traps and designs here, and therefore casualties, despite having a superior advantage here, are really adding up for the Americans. And we also see, not to go into many heartbreaking details here, but we see a horrific escalation of things like the use of chemical weapons, Agent Orange, napalm, things that cause massive devastation to these search and destroy campaigns. Since anyone could be the enemy, there's an increasing intolerance by US soldiers to just kind of wipe out entire villages. one sad example here being a totally voluntary thing was the My Lai massacre. So, all these things are being broadcast on live TV. National news stations are showcasing these footages from the Vietnam War. We see an unpopular draft is going to be declared to boost support for this war. And overall, this war is far less popular here. We're going to see a counterculture movement here of anti war supporters here. We are seeing a fierce opponents to this war, and they are hoping to bring this war to an end ASAP. So all this means that this war is unpopular, all things considered, and therefore the guy that started it, LBJ, is unpopular, all things considered. So on that note, that takes us to what initially could have been LBJ's re-election here. We see that there is the election of 1968, and we see that it's during this process here, as the war's dragging on, there's something called the Tut Offensive, where we technically beat the communists in a tactical advantage, but it's so many lives lost that it barely matters. And that's when Walter Cronkite declares that this war is going to end in a stalemate, and over half of America disapproves of this war. So, hearing that, LBJ is going to drop out of the Democratic nomination for president just a few months before the actual election here. That leads to a massive scrambling. We see that initially JFK's brother, Robert Kennedy, RFK, is going to try and run to fill the void. However, he is assassinated. At the same time, Martin Luther King is assassinated. There is just palpable amounts of unrest because of the war, the draft, civil rights. 1968 is one of the most significant years in US history for the sheer amount of chaos and unrest. So, on that note, that takes us to a concept, one of your terms, something called hawks and doves. Now, I could have mentioned a little bit earlier here, but effectively, hawks are people who support this war. They're mostly older Americans who see it as necessary to stop the spread of communism, that dominant theory. Meanwhile, doves are people who oppose this war. It's wrong. It's imperialist. It is cruel. It is causing unnecessary casualties. And many of them are young Americans, especially college age kids, who have friends who are getting drafted. So, when LBJ drops out and RFK is killed, the guy that was next in line for the Democrat nomination here, based on votes, was a dove named Eugene McCarthy. But he's a little too woke and a little too controversial here, so the Democratic National Convention is going to replace him, kind of stepping over him and nominating a hawk named Hubert Humphrey. So, add to that, the Republicans are running Richard Nixon. We have two hawks, effectively, both the Republicans and the Democrats, and that is going to add up later. More on that later. Anyways, Nixon ends up winning partly because a segregationist, a full-blown segregationist, George Wallace, is running, and he's going to detract votes away. So effectively, Nixon's able to sneak in there and become president. So, what do we see? His foreign policy is a shift away from this containment era here of rather than aggressively trying to stop the spread of communism, what if we try to negotiate? Based on this idea of realpolitik, there is something called détente. Let's not be enemies. Let's negotiate and agree to just live and let live here. Let's have the communists run their side of the world, the capitalists, aka America, run this half. So, we see that Nixon is slowly removing troops and funding from the Vietnam War, even though we have been propping up the southern half of Vietnam for this entire process here. We see Nixon will then declare one of these doctrines here that every president since FDR has had. We see something called the Nixon Doctrine here. And basically, he says Vietnam and its war is a Vietnam problem here. So let's begin a process called Vietnamization, where slowly we just withdraw Americans from the war here so that over time, the only actual combatants in this war are Vietnamese soldiers. And so, little by little, we will withdraw support. Eventually, we will ultimately promise to pay reparations to the northern government of Vietnam. We don't end up doing that, so then the North invades the South, and effectively, the side that we backed lost. But for more on that further down the road here. Anyhow, part of this here, this idea of realpolitik and détente is partly the efforts of Henry Kissinger here, Nixon's his foreign security advisor here. So he is going to focus on this idea here, but he's also very focused on this kind of American hegemony here. Like we are able to effectively dictate what goes on in certain spheres here. And so we will see that before we can actually leave the war, he's going to demand that we escalate the war here. We're going to actually increase the bombing that we see, a heavy bombing campaign that will expand into Laos and Cambodia here. The idea being to disrupt that Ho Chi Minh Trail that the North are using in this era here. So Henry Kissinger was given a Nobel Peace Prize for ending the Vietnam War, but the way he did it caused a massive destabilization. It's going to result in the rise of the Cambodian Khmer Rouge, which is a horrifically fascist group that's going to actually execute a literal quarter of the population. So the efforts we took to get out of the war caused even further atrocities, I'm sad to say. However, this détente is not all doom and gloom. There are some tangible gains in this era here. For example, with the USSR, the Soviet Union, we see Nixon is going to negotiate with Leonid Brezhnev here, and they're going to author the SALT I Treaty, which is basically a huge uh, diminishing of nuclear weapons. We see a major talk about reducing the amount of missiles that we have, which is a big step up from the containment years. This is nice. This is no Berlin blockade. This is no proxy war shadow puppeteers. This is calming things down. Uh, and the talks are beginning with China here, partly due to two Olympic ping pong players who just happen to get along. And slowly, because of that, talks with communist China are starting to improve here and will fully blossom under Jimmy Carter. More on that 2 chapters from now. Meanwhile, what does Nixon do domestically here? So again, his legacy is largely known for kind of really bringing up about the end of the Vietnam War, even though it won't actually end till Ford. But he does kind of a mix of progressive and conservative stuff. Like some of the conservative stuff will involve that his Supreme Court is conservative and they are going to uphold things like the death penalty. But we also do see, partly due to the work of someone named Rachel Carson and her book Silent Spring about how pesticides like DDT are killing eagles, Nixon creates the Environmental Protection Agency and therefore is kind of reining in big business, focusing on its impact on the environmental damage that they cause. That's a huge thing because it's obviously around to this day. We also see it's during that same court is going to author Roe v. Wade, declaring abortion to be a national right. And that is going to further politicize the idea of religious values in politics here. That new right with Barry Goldwater is going to slowly fester around this issue here until it emerges as a full-blown opposition under Ronald Reagan further down the road. Now, anyways, because of all this, though, we do see that there is the economic woes here of the fact that there is an increasing opposition to the US in terms of who we back. Right now, the US is giving Israel support. And as a result, all these countries that oppose Israel are, one, going to try and attack Israel in a war, but two, are going to cut off the US with their oil. We see something called the OPEC oil embargo, and that's going to lead to a crippling economy here, made worse by the fact that all of our car companies are no longer the only ones in the market. European and Japanese cars are now building better than what we have. So the result is something called stagflation, as the economy is both suffering high unemployment and high inflation. Prices are going up, people are also jobless. So Nixon will attempt to fix this with a few things, like price freezes on things like rent, taking us off of the gold standard so that we can adjust properly with inflation here. But this will be a bigger issue than any one country or person, and it will be a recurring issue for the rest of the 1970s here. So, economy's bad, but also, most importantly, Nixon is a deeply paranoid fellow. He is worried that this war is going to cost him the election, and well, we actually see it's one of the biggest blowouts, his election here that he gets in 1972. But he's worried about things like that, so he keeps the war going for long. But also, there was a leak called the Pentagon Papers, releasing all kinds of government secrets because of a whistleblower. Nixon is terrified of that, so he creates this little department here called the Plumbers, full of like ex-FBI and later CIA guys to track down whoever leaked this stuff and bring them to justice. He also starts wiretapping the White House in the process. So, fast forward, because of this whole fear of losing the election, Nixon uses some of those old plumbers to create something called the Committee to Re-elect the President, aka CREEP. And these guys here, they start looking for dirt on how to ensure Nixon wins the election. And part of that is by breaking in to the Watergate Hotel, which is the headquarters of the 1972 Democratic National Convention. They're finding dirt on his opponents here. And all this is going to be discovered. So, what we end up seeing is that this scandal becomes massive here because, in the process of trying to cover all of this up, is how all this stuff about the White House being bugged appears. We see that there's tapes that are revealed. Several have been obviously doctored, minutes of silence, missing footage. So, all this cover up here makes Nixon look incredibly guilty here. And ultimately, it is clear that he's lost the trust of the American people, and Congress is moving to impeach him. Before that can happen, though, Nixon is going to resign the presidency, the first ever president to do so. And basically, by doing that, he avoids the punishments here of being impeached and possibly thrown in jail. So, what we end up seeing is the world that we have left politically is one where neither political party is really trusted here. LBJ and Vietnam ruined the credibility of the Democrats. Watergate and Nixon ruined the credibility of the Republicans. So both parties are seen as rotten. The establishment is rotten. And therefore, next time we cover politics, 2 chapters from now, we are going to see a desire to find people who are from outside the Washington, D.C. establishment and who have fresh new ideas. All right. So that's all for now. We'll go ahead and pick it up there next time. We'll see a little bit more about the kind of social lens of the 1960s here, covering the civil rights movement and all the other movements that spawned from it as a result. All right. We'll pick it up there next time, folks. Thank you. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Let's see.